In today's video, I'm going to show you the 4 essential tools you need to use to transform your landscape images in Lightroom. There are, of course, loads of ways to edit your photos in Lightroom, but the 4 tools I'm going to show you today make up probably about 90% of both my professional photography and my personal work. So let's start out with tool number 1, and it is the crop tool. Now, the crop tool might seem pretty obvious. We all know about the crop tool. We all know what it does. This is not some hidden feature I'm explaining, but actually I think it's one that's often overlooked in how important it can be. We all know that it will straighten up your horizon, but actually it can be really important for refining a good composition. Let's take a look at some examples in Lightroom. Let's start out here, and it should be fairly obvious what the problem is. We've got very distracting elements around the edge of the frame. We've got this tree poking in here and this extra bush going on here, both of which can be very easily fixed just by cropping in a little bit further. So we'll open up our crop overlay, we can drag it in from this side until that's gone, and we can do the same here. And then straight away, we've got a much neater image. We've captured that sort of bleak, isolated feeling that these trees have got, basically being now essentially by themselves. But we haven't had to remove anything in Photoshop just by using the simple crop tool. Now, it's not just about getting rid of distracting elements, although that is incredibly important. You can use it to really narrow down what it is you want to actually be taking a photo of. So I'll use this shot here to show you what I mean. Now, this is a nice enough snap of Edinburgh under some mist. It's actually a pretty poor photo, but I do think that I can make it a lot better by cropping, because there's 2 things wrong really, is that we've got on the right hand side a lot of sort of empty space. We've got these rooftops that don't really add anything. They're certainly not the subject. The subject is very clearly the Balmoral Tower here, these nice looking buildings, and we've got the castle in the background too. But we've also got sort of wasted space down here, none of which really needs to be in our shot. So I'm going to try first of all by just sort of bringing that crop in a bit by going from the original aspect ratio. We're going to go to a 4:5. As you can see, it's brought it in at the sides. We can bring that in a little bit further, just so I'm getting rid of this concrete plinth, and we can bring it in a bit more here. I like having the grid overlay on. That just is going to allow me to consider whether my image is sort of sticking roughly within the rule of thirds. Again, the rule of thirds is not necessarily something that you have to strictly abide by, but it is a good starting point if you're trying to sort of understand the basics of composition. I do think that looks quite a bit better, but we've still got a bit of sort of dead space in this tree down here, and we've still got some of this this railing, and indeed a dude's head just cluttering up the frame a little bit. So I'm wondering if maybe we can go even tighter and do a 1:1, a square crop on this. Certainly we don't need to keep much of a sky because it's sort of empty and white. So that is, again, worth thinking about when you're looking at your image. You probably would have, you'll have considered the composition when taking the image, but now is a good time to sort of think about how you can refine it further. What is sort of wasted space in your shot? We don't need so much of the sky, so we can bring this down, narrow it, and just make sure that just the subject that we want, the clock tower, these cool buildings, the sort of slightly misty silhouette of the castle going on up there. All of those elements now are there, but we don't have that wasted space around the edges distracting our eye. We know exactly where to look, and I think this looks a lot better as a result. Now, of course, a good crop can't fix terrible composition. If you've accidentally chopped the top of a mountain off or chopped the top of a church tower, you can't crop that back in. But a good crop can just help refine the composition that you've already got, and as a result, it makes your image look like it's been a bit more considered. Our next tool is the graduated filter, often known as the linear gradient tool. For this, I'm going to use this shot of Mull as a bit of an example. Straight away, let's just go back to our crop tool already, and let's try a 4:5. Just bring it in, neaten up this composition. We've got wasted grass down here. Try and get rid of some of this tree on the outside, but we want to keep this cloud in the top of the frame. It's adding some interest in our sky. straight away, I think that looks a little bit better. So now let's take a look at our graduated filter. It is up here in our tools panel, and we click on this one, and what it does, if I just click show selected mask, we drag it in. Everything that's pink is where the effect is taking place. So basically it allows us to drag an effect into a part of our scene. For landscapes then, it's a really powerful tool because it means that you can edit your sky basically independently of everything else in your scene. So in this example, I want to try and add a bit more contrast to the sky. I want to try and make that cloud pop out from the blue a little bit more, but I don't want to apply the contrast to the hill, to this rock down here. I think it looks nice everywhere else. So I've dragged in that filter just over where I want it to be, and you can feather it out by grabbing the lines and sort of moving them up and down, moving this, or just moving it around exactly as you want to. So you've got a lot of control about where it's going to be applied. Let's just hide the mask and let's just reset our effects because we don't want it that dark. I might darken it down a little bit, and I'm going to up the contrast because that's what we want. As we do, we can see how much more bold that blue sky gets. We can add some extra clarity in there. That's really going to help separate out the cloud from the blue sky. It's got a lot more pop now, but we haven't applied those effects to anywhere else in the scene. It is great for editing your skies. The other way I'll sometimes use it is by bringing in just a darker effect. If I just drag in from the bottom here, it's less important on this scene because we haven't got so many distracting elements, but just say I wanted to draw the eye away from these grasses down here, we can bring in another radial filter, linear filter in the bottom that's just going to be a reduction in the exposure. It darkens things down and instead allows the eye to be drawn to the middle of the scene where our subject is. It's particularly handy to use if you've got a bit of a blown out sky. Let's say, for example, in this scene here, we want to sort of darken up the ground. So if you've upped the exposure, then suddenly we've got this sky which is very overpoweringly bright. So it's very easy. Instead, we just bring in that filter. We can see exactly where it's being applied by using the show select overlay. And then we can just bring that exposure back down. We can bring our highlights back down. So we've been able to keep that sky completely under control without affecting anything else in the scene. Now, the next tool that we'll be using is the adjustment brush tool. Like the graduated filter tool, this lets us apply edits to select parts of the scene, except this time we can just paint them in wherever we want. So let's take a look at this shot as a bit of an example, and we can just start out by doing the crop properly, as we've already gone through, bringing it into something like this, neatening up that composition. But I don't think I want to do anything else. The exposure generally is basically fine. Maybe slightly lift those shadows, but everything else I'm going to do basically with the brush tool. So the brush tool is up here, we click that, and we get the same panel as before, all these different exposure and highlight options, and also our clarity. Clarity is going to be very important, but we'll come back to that in a moment. First thing I'm going to do is, just by using my middle mouse wheel, is just make a slightly smaller brush size. I'm going to go to our brush panel here, make sure that it's nicely feathered, and also I want a low flow because I just want to be able to paint the effect into the scene. I don't want to apply all of it at once. I want a higher exposure and I want to up those shadows. And what I want to do is just start painting on this water because I want to bring up the brightness of it a little bit. As I do, you'll see that it's getting brighter and brighter. It's bringing out more of those details, more of the reflections of the tree from above, which is great. It's exactly what we want. I want it to look very, very reflective. So it's already looking pretty good. And if we just drag that exposure around, you can see what it's doing. But because it's been feathered out, you can see there isn't a hard edge. So it only becomes obvious when we really crank it high. But we don't want it to go anything like that high. Something around there looks good. And in fact, if we just quickly just go down here and turn it off and on, you can see already how much of a difference that has made. Maybe paint some extra in around here. But here is when I'm going to apply some clarity, because clarity is going to bring out those small details. It's really going to increase the feel of this being a nice reflection. So let's just start dragging that up. As we do, look at the difference it's making. I want to take this really quite far. I'm going to take it up to about 50, which is a huge amount. And then again, off and on. It's made such a big difference, but because we've only applied the effect in a select part of the scene, it doesn't look overpowering. If I go and apply plus 50 clarity to the whole image, it looks absolutely awful. Everything's gone crunchy and nasty. It does not look good at all. So we don't want that. But instead, by using the brush, we've been able to just put that clarity in where we want to, and it looks so much better as a result. Next thing I'm going to do though is get a new brush, and I'm going to reset the effect, and I'm just going to increase that exposure a little bit. And I'm going to start painting it in on this little bit of rock around here, just where some of the light is. I'm going to try and get some extra light into these shadowy areas around the water, a little bit around here, and also a little bit over the bridge as well, just to help that pop out from those trees a little bit more, because after all, the bridge is the subject in this shot. We want it to stand out. I'm now going to do another new one, but this time it's going to go a lower exposure. Basically what we're doing is what's called dodging and burning, which is an old photography term for basically painting in light and shadow to try and emphasize where that light already is. In this case, I want to try and darken down some of those distracting areas. Like, I don't want the eye to be drawn around some of these corners. I want the eye to be focusing in on the rocks and on the bridge. So we want an extra bit of sort of darkening around the edge, kind of like a vignette, but we're having a lot more control by doing it ourselves. I might even sort of darken down a little bit on this rock because it is quite bright. Something like this, I think, is already looking really nice. And again, if we turn off our effects, that is how much difference it has made to our image, and that is just from using the adjustment brush. Nothing else in our image has been changed. If we turn this off, go back up, look, nothing has been done to the exposure, to highlights, a little bit of extra shadows. Everything else that we've done in this shot has just been from using those brushes, which is absolutely superb. That brings me on to my final tool, and it is the Hue, Saturation and Luminance panel, often very quickly referred to just as the HSL tab. And you will find that just down here, HSL/color. Now, there are two ways of looking at this, either seeing hue, saturation, luminance as separate tabs, or you can just click all and see them all in a long line. I prefer to see them separately, just keeps things a little bit neater. Now, it's this tool where I feel that most of my artistic, creative work is done. It's where my images tend to really come to life. And I will show you exactly what I mean. So straight out of camera, the colors in the shot are kind of fine. It's an okay snap. It was taken in the middle of autumn, but it doesn't look super autumn. We have got some autumnal tones in these trees, but what I want to do is really bring out that warmth, and I'm going to do all of that in the HSL tab. First of all, we've got these very emeraldy greens on the moss around here, and I think by grabbing this green slider, dragging it into the yellows, it's going to give much more of a golden tone, but it's had the knock-on effect of making everything else look a little bit sickly. So we're going to do the same with the yellows. Grab that and move it more into the oranges, give it a deeper, rich tone, and look, as I go further, look how beautiful and vibrant. I don't want to go all the way, but most of the way. We're going big on our colors on this edit. And then with the orange as well, we're going to grab that and move that down. And we don't want to go too far with the oranges. If you go too far, it goes pink. We want to just keep it a very, very rich, vibrant tone. And I think something like that is spot on. And if we turn this panel off and back on, look at how much difference that has made. That has completely transformed this image from looking, you know, kind of fine into suddenly being this beautiful autumnal dreamy scene. And that is just by tweaking those those three color channels. Let's take that a little bit further. Let's go into our luminance. Let's increase the greens, because that is going to just help bring the eye to this cool moss detail on this rock. Increase the yellows a little bit, and certainly as I increase the oranges, in fact, as I just sort of move this up and down, look at how it's looking like the light is catching the leaves on this tree. It looks so nice. So really want to kind of up that a little bit, give that nice effect. Let's go into our saturation, increase the saturation of our oranges a little bit. Not so much the yellows, because it gives kind of an overpowering effect. Just a little bit, maybe just plus 10, and maybe just a little bit on those greens as well. I don't think there are many other colors in this scene at all. There might be a little bit of blue in the water. In fact, there is. So I just want to take that blue out basically completely. I'm going to do the same, I think, with the aquas. In fact, I don't want to take it down all the way because it's given me some slight artifacts in the rock, but most of the way, just to kind of take out that blue shift that's in the water. I'm going to do the same with every other color that we don't need. The reds can stay. Don't think we've got much reds, but suddenly look at the difference that has made, hand in hand with that brush tool as well. So if we just go before, this is what the shot looked like out of camera. It's fine. It needs a bit of work, but with those basically the two tools, the brush and the HSL tab, that has done everything on here, and it's only taken a few minutes. Haven't gone into Photoshop, haven't applied presets, haven't applied some look that I've downloaded from some other photographer. I've played around just with the hues of the colors and with that brush tool, and we've got such an amazing effect, and it hasn't even taken that long. But that brings me to the end of my video. I really do hope that it's been helpful to see how I would use those 4 simple tools to create really, really impactful results in my shots. If you have enjoyed this video, do please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and I will see you next time.